Seems like every week on the show we have someone else telling us why we need to be extroverts, why we need to express ourselves, why we need to distribute our brands, why we need to be loud and noisy on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. And suddenly someone is coming along and saying, we're wrong. The real power is not of being an extrovert, but being an introvert. There's a major new book out called Quiet, The Power of Introverts, and we're lucky enough to have Susan Cain, its author, on the show today. Susan, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Susan, first of all, congratulations. This book is gone, ironically enough, given the nature of the book, it's gone viral. You've sold 17 foreign markets. The book's only been out a week in the US. It must be a very exciting time for you.
It is incredibly exciting. It's exciting, and in a strange way, it's not totally unexpected, only because I know how many millions of people there are out there for whom the message of this book really speaks. I kind of think about this a little bit the way when we first started talking about the women's movement back in the early 60s. We sometimes talked about the problem that has no name. And I think that this book is also addressing a problem that has no name, namely that there is a tremendous bias in our culture against introverts. And so most introverts go through their lives trying to pass as extroverts. And whenever you spend your time trying to pass as somebody you're not, you're sacrificing major parts of yourself along the way, and you're kind of giving away some of your power. And so what I'm trying to do is say to introverts who make up half of the population, according to the latest studies, I'm trying to say to introverts, it's time for us to reclaim our natural powers instead of trying to ape those of people who are not.
Well, Susan, before we get to the power of introverts, why is it, in your view, we have what might be called the cult of the extrovert in our culture? What's the reason for that?
Well, it goes back a long way, but probably the biggest of the historical roots it date back to the turn of the 20th century, where what happened was at that time we saw the rise of big business. And so suddenly you had people who had formerly been living in small towns and working alongside people they'd known all their lives. And now suddenly they were all moving into the cities and trying to get jobs in corporations and needing to stand out in job interviews and needing to pay sales calls and all this kind of thing. So at that moment in time, we moved from what historians call a culture of character, which had existed previously, where we valued people for their moral rectitude and for the good deeds they performed when no one was looking. But suddenly we moved into a culture of personality. And what became valued was a person who was very easily magnetic and very charismatic. And it's really interesting because right around the same time is when movie stars came to the fore. There had been no such thing as movie stars before this. And of course, movie stars were the ultimate examples. They were the ultimate role models of what it meant to be easily charismatic. And so it was a kind of perfect storm of forces that we have been living with since then for the last 100 years. I mean, we're still very much in the throes of a culture of personality.
So you're saying the idea of personal charisma or magnetism is a historical phenomenon. It's not something that's always existed throughout history.
Right, that is what I'm saying. And in fact, if you look at other cultures, like one of the things I do in the book is I look at Far Eastern cultures, particularly in the Confucian belt. And what you find in these cultures is much more of a reverence for silence and for quiet. Words in these cultures are seen as being potentially forms of destruction. Like to utter words is to potentially get the speaker into trouble, to potentially hurt someone's feelings. So traditionally in Confucian cultures, a person who is more quiet and more reserved is often seen as very wise and very judicious. Now this is changing in these cultures too, because just as the US and other Western cultures, export McDonald's and so on, they also export ideal personality styles, but the differences still remain.
Susan, this is TechCrunch TV, so we have an audience that particularly is interested in the impact of technology on culture and on society. What is the connection between industrial technology and the rise of what you call the cult of personality?
Well, I think the internet has played a really interesting role in a number of ways in the kind of culture that I'm talking about. And one of these ways, it's actually very ironic. What happened with the internet is you had originally, in the early days of the internet, you had a group of people working together collectively online. Many of them were quite introverted. Many of them were very individualistic types of people. They were working together in their own rooms or in their own offices, but coming together online. And together, through this form of sort of alone together type of work, they produce these amazing creations, Wikipedia and so on, all the different collective productions that we know about. So that was great. But then what happened is people in the broader culture started pointing to these triumphs and these accomplishments and saying, everything, the hive mind must be the answer. Collective consciousness must be the answer. Creativity derives from gregariousness. And so they started then applying the lessons of the internet to places where, to my mind, it doesn't belong. They started saying, okay, we should be inside our workplaces, we should be coming together in groups, just the way the people on the internet have been doing, because groups are the answer to creative thinking. And the same thing is happening in our schools. And this, to my mind, is a place where we've really gone wrong.
Susan, I know the thing that you're most concerned with, and that lies behind much of the reasons for writing the book, is the emergence of what you call groupthink in our culture, both online and offline. Where is the evidence of this new proliferation of groupthink?
Well, it's funny. I really found the evidence as I was doing my book research. I've been researching this book since 2005. And one of the things I did was I toured many schools and I toured many workplaces across the country. And I was amazed to see how things had changed in the years since I had been in school in particular. I remembered school as being a place where you went and you sat at your desk. You had your friends, surely, but you sat at your desk and you did your own assignments. And you learned to work productively on your own. But nowadays, the school day is organized around the group. So in many schools, kids no longer sit together. They no longer sit at their own desk. They sit in what are called pods of 4 or 5 or 6 desks. And many of their assignments in class are group assignments, even for subjects that you would think depend on digging deep inside your own creative place, your own creative soul, like math or creative writing. These subjects are also taught as groups. And same thing is true in our workplaces, where now we are moving increasingly to open plan office spaces where there are no walls dividing employees. There's no such thing as a room of one's own anymore. That's kind of an antiquated concept. And the average amount of office space per worker went from 500 square feet in the 1970s to 200 square feet today.
Susan, what is the value then of the introvert, of the person who keeps themselves apart, who wants to be in a room of their own?
Well, it turns out for everyone, not just introverts, but extroverts also, solitude is a crucial component of creativity. And by the way, I'm not arguing here that group work should be abolished and teamwork should be abolished. I'm not saying that at all, because I think that there is a time and a place for people to come together and share their ideas also. But what I do want to see is for us to restore solitude to the place of respect that it has enjoyed for centuries and that it has only recently lost. The problem is that human beings are such inherently social creatures, introverts too. We're all so social that we can't be in a room full of other people without instinctively mimicking other people's opinions, even about things as seemingly as primal and as personal as who you're attracted to. We start taking on other people's opinions about who is attractive without even realizing that we're actually aping someone else. We actually believe it's our own opinion. So it's crucial to give people solitary time so that they can actually dig deep into themselves and know what they think and advance thought.
Susan, in a world of Facebook and Twitter, where everyone, it seems, is expressing themselves collectively in public, is the internet the solution or the problem now to this world where quiet seems to be disappearing from our lives?
Well, it's such a complicated question because, of course, on the one hand, the internet can be, it can come to seem oppressive that you're kind of called upon to be self-presenting all day long, even when you've gone home from work. Now you have to self-present on Facebook and on Twitter. But on the other hand, I actually take a more positive view of it, because I think that the kind of interaction that we have on the internet can be equally experienced as a creative project as it is as a form of self-promotion or self-presentation. That's how I think about all my experiences on the internet. They're a form of creativity. And I think also, Marcel Proust talked about how reading was the miracle of a communication in the midst of solitude. And I think that the internet can be experienced very similarly. You're connecting with people, you're communicating with them, but you're still on some level alone. And that balance can be a very happy place. And so it's not surprising to me that the website Mashable ran a poll, I think it was a couple years ago, and they asked their readers how many of them were introverts or extroverts. And the majority turned out to be introverts, as was Pete Cashmore, the founder. That was not surprising to me at all.
Susan, we had a professor of MIT, Sherry Turkle, on the show a few months ago, wrote a book called Alone Together. Mm-hmm. You seem to, in some way, agree with her, but she's much more pessimistic about the impact of social media on us as individuals. You're more hopeful, it sounds.
Well, I guess I'd say it's a little bit of both. I mean, to the extent that we are using the internet as a way not to form real-life connections with people, that is a problem. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much our technology changes. We're human beings, and we need to love, and we need to connect, and we need to physically bond. That's how we feel alive, and that's how we feel happy. But having said that, as long as in an individual's life there's a place for those kind of real-world connections, I also think that alone together connections are incredibly powerful. And I saw this when I was doing my book research, and I was visiting different companies and seeing what worked. And I found that most people I spoke to, when they were thinking about their office space, they preferred to have their own office or their own cubicle or someplace where they could get away. But there was one interesting exception to this, and that was people who were working in small groups where they knew each other really well, and they knew each other so well that they could work all of them in the same open space, and they would describe it as a kind of experience of being alone together, because they would each give each other total autonomy and total space, but have the connection of having somebody near them at the same time. I think that as a society, we are somehow afraid of the idea of any sense of lonesomeness or lighting out on your own. But I think that we should rethink that fear.
I want to thank you so much for coming on TechCrunch TV, and I want to encourage all our readers to read Quiet. I think it's one of the most important and best reviewed books of the year, and I hope you'll come back again quite soon to tell me more about the importance of being an introvert in today's world of noise and extroverts. Thank you so much, Susan.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it, and I'd love to come back.